Hello, everybody, to attending the annual NCWA meeting. And we're very fortunate to have with us today Secretary Wade Crowfoot and Kristen Pierce representing EPA. So we're going to talk with them a little bit about some questions we have for them related to kind of our current list of activities that NCWA and us as member agencies are undertaking. So again, just welcome everybody for attending, and to you, Wade and Kristen, for your time today. The conference, or at least the annual meeting, is really focused on this ridgetop to rivermouth water management. I think we all play a role in that. I think it's really been kind of nice the way NCWA has teed up that approach to it. So I think in light of the things that we want to cover today, it would be kind of in light of that framework. So again, we have Wade and Kristen here, and at least for me, I got to know Wade first, I think, when you were in Governor Brown's Office of Emergency Services or something.
More or less, yeah.
Yeah, 2014. So it's been a while, and here we get to do another drought as you as secretary. So again, welcome, and I know you've talked to our membership before. Kristen, welcome. You're probably not as well known as Wade, but certainly, at least in me seeing you around EPA, I know you do a lot of the hard work behind the scenes. And I mentioned to you, like, there's doers and talkers, and certainly I'm a doer, and I think you're a doer too. So really appreciate your hard work. But if you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit to our folks, please feel free to do that.
Sure. So thanks, Thad, and great to be here with you, Wade. I'm Kristen Pierre, Deputy Secretary and Special Counsel for Water Policy at Cali PA, and I work closely with Secretary Blumenfeld and the State Water Board and the Regional Water Boards on all things water. So happy to be here today.
Great, thanks. Thanks for joining us. So really, I've divided kind of our talk into maybe four pieces. First, talking about kind of the ridgetop to rivermouth water management section. We want to talk a bit about dry year and drought. Obviously, we're right in the middle of that. We've been working with you on voluntary agreements a little bit, so just want to get your perspective on that. And then just some nature-based solutions. Obviously, the governor came out with some new priorities and some percentage targets. And I know you were both probably part of that conversation. So maybe just end our conversation about some big picture thinking there and some strategy, which I think is exciting. So that's really kind of what we want to cover today. And again, look forward to both your insights into these different questions. So first, on our ridgetop to rivermouth management, we've really been focusing on that as the talks today. And some of that includes many of the priorities for the administration, which I know you've both been involved in, the water resilience portfolio and the 2021 budget, including headwaters, there's forest health, there's floodplain restoration, sustainable groundwater management. To start, can you both share maybe your vision and thoughts on multi-benefit water management from ridgetop to rivermouth, and how the local and regional agencies in our region can work with you in the state to advance some of these important efforts?
Yeah, maybe I'll start. So first of all, Thad, good to be with you, and I'm disappointed not to be up at the Sierra Nevada Brewery with you all, and to be getting Bryce Lundberg's goofy little door prize gifts. I wore his "Make Floodplains Great Again" cap most of the last summer. But look, you guys are doing great work, and I think we're always glad to support and engage however we can. And I'm not surprised with the thoughtful theme of the meeting here today. You do a great job actually, taking this holistic vision of our water system of systems and really figuring out how we improve our environmental management in a manner that actually improves our water reliability. And I think you all have been onto it for some time, which is, the Sacramento River system, and certainly all of our water systems throughout the state, are complicated, expansive systems. And as you point out, they start in our forested watershed, where our snow falls and our rain falls, and they make their way out ultimately to the ocean, and then serve our economy and our communities and the environment in between. And so from our perspective, the governor's water resilience portfolio takes sort of an all of the above approach on managing, improving, restoring, stabilizing these systems. And so we know it's not just about water supply. It's about environmental management, water supply, and so many other things. And that's really where these multi-benefit projects come in. I think you all deserve a lot of credit for elevating the use of multi-benefit floodplains as just one example, a way that we can reduce downstream flood safety risks, improve our groundwater aquifers in some cases, and of course, create environmental habitat, which is going to keep our fish healthy. And we know if our fish are healthy and avoid falling into that endangered species status, we're going to have a more stable, reliable water system. So a lot of different examples that I could point out, but I'll just say that one area that I'm most excited about making progress on is really building the connection between water agencies and forest management. And you take a member of NCWA like Yuba Water Agency, where Yuba and Placer County Water Agency are investing their resources in the water agency in maintaining and restoring the health of forested watersheds, because they know that's going to protect the water quality and quantity that they deliver to their customers. So I'd like to see us figure out a way to amplify that type of leadership, not only across the Sacramento River Valley, but across the state, so that we're really taking care of our water systems by taking care of our forests. Those are some initial thoughts I have.
Yeah, thanks, Wade. Kristen, thoughts?
Yeah, thanks. So I would echo everything that Secretary Crowfoot said. I think this year, we've experienced some pretty dramatic impacts to our water systems, both with the pandemic and with the wildfires. So, this year was really an unprecedented year for wildfires, 4 million acres plus burned across the state. And the pandemic also was a significant and continues to be impact on drinking water systems. So early on in the pandemic, the governor issued a moratorium on water shutoffs for people's inability to pay their water bills. And the board looked into that recently. I mean, we knew there were going to be impacts from that, but I think when the executive order was signed, nobody had any sort of concept of how long the pandemic was going to take to clear up. And of course, we're all still in our homes at this virtual conference, not at the Sierra Nevada Brewery, unfortunately. So, we looked at some data, and we have an estimated $1 billion in total household debt across the state as of January, and that continues to grow. That means that at least 1.6 million households in California have water debt, and that's approximately 12% of households throughout the state. And the pandemic's impacts are also being felt at the system level. So these, a lot of small water systems that were already vulnerable and don't have the capacity, never did have the capacity, and now are sort of hit with a shock and are less able to manage for that. And so we're working now on how we're going to manage coming out of the pandemic so that these don't continue to be sort of ongoing impacts that we're dealing with. And of course, the wildfires, we all know, have significant impacts to watersheds. Post-fire storm systems are devastating, and we've already seen some dramatic footage, for example, from Highway 1, which is just downstream of the Dolan fire, where a huge portion of the highway just went straight into the ocean. And of course, many of your agencies know, these post-fire storm systems can bring sediments and debris and sometimes hazardous materials into our reservoirs, into our surface waters. And so all of this, I think, is to say that we are going to need multi-benefit restoration projects now more than ever. And that takes a sort of, as Secretary Crowfoot said, all of the above strategy. We need everybody involved. There's a couple of areas where the NCWA agencies, I think, now could start to get involved, where it's interagency things that we're working on. One is a spatial analysis to help us prioritize priority watersheds, the Oroville, Shasta, and Trinity watersheds. So Cali PA and the Resources Agency are currently working on developing that tool, which will help us sort of identify the priority areas for restoration projects going forward. There's going to be outreach coming in the near future on how stakeholders can get involved in that process, and we would welcome the expertise of the NCWA agencies in that. Another area is the State Water Board is working closely with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and Sustainable Conservation on development of a restoration general permit that would cover large restoration projects. And that would include mitigation projects, voluntary restoration projects, and potentially even mitigation that could be included with the voluntary agreements. And so that is anticipated to be coming out in the next couple of months this spring, and hopefully we'll have in place adopted in order by the end of the year. So there's a lot going on in this space, and really would welcome engagement of your member agencies in all of it.
That's great. Thanks, Kristen. Those are just two great opportunities. So thanks for bringing those to the front so we know about those. Thanks. Switching to dry year a little bit. Obviously, we all know that we're facing a potentially tough year. Wade, again, mentioned we worked with you in the past drought in 14 and 15. And, certainly, Kristen, we worked with the EPA and State Board team during the last drought and currently are. Right now, NCWA does have a dry year task force that's really looking at things that we can be doing from an NCWA perspective this year. Fritz Durst and Brent Hastley are chairing or co-chairing a group that we have on that. We're having calls every other week and certainly inviting some of your staff to attend those as well. But as you look forward to this year, or we look forward to this year, what are some of your initial thoughts on how we can be working together to kind of get through potentially this drought if it still remains dry, and then at least from our perspective, how we can be helping some of your teams in terms of trying to address some of the issues that you are aware of right now.
Well, I mean, where we sit here in early March, it's fairly clear that we're going to have a dry or critical water year. On top of last year, which of course was a really challenging water year. So much like NCWA, we've been coordinating across agency for the last few months and really preparing ourselves for the second dry year. And that means any number of things, including sort of what administrative actions we'll need to take to allow, for example, reservoirs to keep water in storage for later in the year. I was up with my family at Lake Oroville, I guess, a couple weekends ago, and it's really tough to see the reservoirs in the condition that they're in. I think one benefit of coming out of the this epic drought of the middle part of the last decade was that a lot of us were here for that and managed our way through it in partnership with water agencies. So I think in terms of working together, we'll continue to rely on two-way communication, very nimble around how do we manage our system, what types of flexibilities might we be able to exercise. We're working on how we can make water transfers, for example, more nimble than they've been in the past. The Department of Water Resources has some strong improvements there. And then how we can make decisions in real time regarding the environmental management we need to protect these endangered species while maximizing use of the water for supply. I will say at the same time, we have to keep our eyes on the prize with just building resilience over the long term. So the governor's proposed budget a couple months back calls for more funding for local assistance for SGMA, sustainable groundwater management. And so we're going to continue to need to allow SGMA to be implemented by local agencies, even as we contend with the current year. And we're going to continue to build more habitat using about $175 million of Prop 68 funding in partnership with NCWA agencies over the next few years. I imagine that if dry conditions stay dry and we really start to experience the kind of impacts we experienced in the second year of the last drought, we will likely pull ourselves together in a task force or a multi-agency group that allows for participation from water agencies. So again, you understand what we as state agencies are doing to manage. We understand what you're doing, and then we can, problem solve together to get through the year. Kristen, what are your thoughts?
Thanks, Wade. One thing that comes to mind is the significant impacts that the salmon experienced from the last drought, the mortality events in the Sacramento River. So temperature management is really, I think, forefront. All indications are looking like this year is going to be dry and potentially a drought year. And so I think there has been good communication over the last couple of years, and the hope is that that would continue. It's really important to early planning is really important. So these next couple of months are going to be crucial to making sure that the right management decisions are made to protect the temperatures coming out of Shasta and going into the Sacramento River. And so, I think in the past, NCWA agencies have been really helpful in developing the plan and also developing voluntary actions that can be taken to ameliorate some of the most significant impacts to temperature. And so I think we'd welcome that type of interaction again this year. Certainly these, like I said, next couple of months are going to be critical. So the draft comes from the Bureau of Reclamation to the State Water Board, the draft temperature management plan, and usually in mid-April. And then the final is finalized in late May. So again, now is the time to kind of start looking at that and figuring out how we're going to manage it.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen and Wade. I know for at least representing a lot of our growers, even though it's March 1, they're already starting to plan for what to do this year for planting. Obviously we've been asked for potentially doing water transfers to benefit other parts of the state. So as you said, we're having discussions now. So certainly the more we can partner with your staffs on how do we move that process forward, and trying to get to some understandings even by the end of this month would be super helpful. So certainly if you have some thoughts on who we should be talking to, specifically from your different agencies, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, well, I'll just mention that, first of all, thanks in advance for those conversations. I recall quite vividly just how instrumental, your agencies were in NCWA in actually helping us manage for some of those environmental issues in the last drought. So huge thanks for that, and look forward to the partnership. I mean, we're going to be managing this at the principal level. Kristen is the key deputy to Secretary Blumenfeld, and she works closely with Joaquin and Eileen at the state board. Likewise, Chuck Bonham at Fish and Wildlife, Carla Namath at Water Resources. So I would say that if, we should just pull ourselves together and have a high-level meeting to kind of scope out what the decision-making tempo looks like in the coming weeks and months, and then just make sure we've got the right technical people staying connected. So as you all are making decisions, we understand that, and then we can tell you when we're making decisions, and we can, coordinate and synergize.
Great. Thanks, Wade. Let's turn to voluntary agreements, a simple process that should be take a matter of months, right? I know both of you are really involved in voluntary agreement discussions from, I think, different perspectives. So I think maybe would be helpful is maybe just to get your insights on where voluntary agreements stand, and then maybe how each of your agencies are approaching them, because I do think it's a little bit unique, and not everybody understands that. So I think maybe just talking a little about, and then how you're both working together with your respective agencies.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to underscore that we're working together across our agencies, and I think a new and different way. So Governor Newsom came in, and at an early cabinet meeting, he looked at us all. We're secretaries managing these agencies, and he says, "Look, I understand that you get treated as pretty important people in Sacramento, but very few people outside of state government actually know what each of your agencies does, and what they care about is, are you getting stuff done for California?" And I think, historically and naturally in big governments, there can be these institutional tensions and sort of turf between departments or agencies. We've really worked hard to break that down, some of those inherent tensions among our different missions within state government. So we have what's called a one state water team, and we meet frequently with Kristen and Jared and Joaquin and Eileen at the water board, and again, Chuck and Carla. And that doesn't mean, we don't have different perspectives or we don't have different obligations, but we work to really problem solve and make decisions as an administration. Which really was a good example of that was that water resilience portfolio. So on these voluntary agreements, I think there used to be a perception that sort of DWR and Fish and Wildlife were sort of one team working with the water contractors, and they threw something over the transom to the water board for the water board to consider. quietly in a black box. I mean, that was sort of the stereotype. And I think we flipped that on its head. What we worked for the first year to do is bring all of the parties together in that so-called plenary session, met bi-weekly basis, almost for an entire year, and to develop this voluntary agreements to obviously enable the water board to do what it's mandated to do by state and federal law, which is update that water quality plan. We know that the water board has to do this. And so our focus is, let's develop a package that's workable for water agencies, for our state and federal agencies, for environmental conservation groups, that frankly is going to protect those beneficial uses more quickly than the traditional process of regulations, water rights adjudication, litigation. And so we continue to think a voluntary agreement or set of agreements is a win-win-win. We're not agnostic on actually whether we want to achieve a set of voluntary agreements. We very much do. The complexity and the time that we've taken is we need to ensure that program of implementation, including the flows and the habitat, actually is scientifically adequate and therefore legally adequate. The voluntary agreement, once it's produced, is going to go through a blind scientific peer review, where objective scientists that know nothing about the politics of California water are going to review it for its adequacy. It's going to go through a CEQA process, and then ultimately through public analysis and hearings at the State Water Board. And we, as champions of the voluntary agreements, want to make sure that those agreements are an adequate program of implementation. We know that they will be challenged legally. And so therefore, all the work we've been doing is to really ensure that we can collectively identify the assets, the flow, the habitat, the management, the science, that's actually going to meet the bar that federal and state law sets for the water board. I think it's clear that, over in 2020, we were stymied by some pretty significant differences with the Trump administration as it relates to the protection of endangered species. And those legal differences, frankly, halted our progress. The good news is that the new administration has made it very clear that they wanted to roll up the sleeves, work with us, explore how we resolve those legal differences, and get back around the table on the voluntary agreements. And as you all know, the water agencies have been hard at work in recent months, really trying to make this framework, this VA framework that we presented last February, and turn it into identifying how that framework or something similar to it could be produced into this set of agreements that would be presented to the water board. So I'm very bullish actually right now. I know the governor wants to get this done because I hear from him and Jared hears from him quite regularly asking for status updates. We're doing the good work, with water agencies and other stakeholders, really identifying what are those assets that are needed ultimately to flow into that set of agreements and ultimately be analyzed and presented to the water board. And Kristen is truly one of the brains behind the voluntary agreement. So I'd be interested in whatever perspective you'd add.
Yeah, thanks, Wade. I would just say, I think I would add, that this is something that the State Water Board is also quite supportive of and hopeful will succeed because of the reasons that Secretary Crowfoot, you highlighted, which is, the improvements can get into the system much more efficiently and effectively. And, it can be a suite of assets. It's flow, it's habitat, it's funding. It's the whole system working together. Those things are things that are either difficult or impossible for the water board to regulate because they have limited authority. So they recognize the benefits of these VAs and are hopeful that that we will succeed in bringing them a package that is scientifically and legally adequate, which is what we are aiming to do. But I will say that even if that doesn't happen, the board is going to be completing its update of the water quality control plan. And in that, there will be a voluntary pathway The hope, of course, is that we bring something fully baked to the board for analysis. But even if that's not completed, there will be a pathway analyzed for voluntary agreements that could be slotted in. So this is something that the State Water Board is supportive of, and of course Cali PA is and has been for a number of years at this point. So.
Yeah, and Kristen, I might add a couple more things. One is, this challenge is obviously decades in the making. So we appreciate, everyone's patience, recognizing that, it's going to take some time to figure this out. We've been at this about 2 years in this administration, and we do think we're making progress. Many of us spend more time on the voluntary agreements than any other single initiative within state government right now. The other point I'd make is we've really tried to make more transparent our sort of assessment around the voluntary agreements. Jared and I have called this the open book test. So we really have invited in the water board staff and the fish and wildlife staff and the water resources biologists, so that we're all understanding how we determine adequacy or consider adequacy. Now, that's not obviously the official process that the water board has to go through, and that's an independent process, but this gives us a sense of really what's needed to be adequate. And we think that's going to really serve us in the months to come.
Maybe just follow-up questions to each one of you, and maybe just more to maybe manage expectations or set some timelines. Wade, I think you kind of touched on a little bit, but maybe just from each one of your perspectives, at least from the Sac Valley water user tributary perspective, we've had our proposals sitting out there for a while. So I guess one to you, Wade, when do you feel, or when do you think would be the right time to actually sit down and reconvene with us about where we may be on our respective proposals? And then for you, Kristen, you talked about the state board process, which I think we're all aware of, but in time frame, in terms of when do we need to get something to you that if the board were to march forward with its process, that we would need to get something in there to make sure we have a viable alternative to an unimpaired flow approach, if you will.
Well, I mean, I think that the time is generally now to focus in on trying to get this, done and turned into a proposal for consideration. So I think, early spring, which is, basically now, this spring, we should get back around the table and with more detail understand what's being proposed by, the various parties. I really want to encourage us to, roll up our sleeves and get this done as it relates to the proposal. We think we were pretty clear about the voluntary agreement framework that we put out last year, and we really worked hard to identify sort of what is that base level of adequacy for a proposal. That things got complicated as we changed the pumping regimes in the Delta from the federal biological opinion and the state incidental take permit. So it took some time then to figure out, okay, how are we expressing that framework, that baseline adequacy, given those different regimes? We think we're in a place right now to really to help articulate what's needed to meet that adequacy. So I do think that this spring, getting back around a table and talking through what's being proposed would be helpful, because I know the water board needs to move forward, on phase 2, to again, comply with the state and federal legal requirements.
Yeah, and I would just echo what Secretary Crowfoot said. We are intensely focused right now on rounding out the discussions and getting a package together. And so the time is now, but folks should rest assured that there will be plenty of notice if and when the board decides to continue the process, and there will be a lot of process before anything is completed. So, stay tuned on that. But again, the focus now is really to try to solidify the package to present.
Great. Thanks. We'll appreciate just giving us heads up on those, because I know there's a lot of people watching this who are pretty invested in this. So setting some expectations is really helpful. So thanks for those responses. Just in the few minutes we have left here, certainly just kind of wanted to end with maybe just some bigger thinking, and at least some of your strategic visioning. But, certainly the governor's October 2020 executive order, had some nature-based solutions, biodiversity, some targets sitting out there. So maybe just give us some thoughts about, as I'm sure you were involved in helping prepare some of that, for us in the Sacramento Valley, what can we be thinking of? How can we be helping, or what potentially do you have planned for our region that we can really look to partner with you and engaging on some of these longer term and bigger type visioning that you have?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with the recognition that, our water system of systems built California into what it is today. You think about the flood control reservoirs in the Sacramento Valley that actually enabled, safe settlement in the Sacramento Valley. So human engineering, is central to essentially, water deliveries, our water system. At the same time, our conditions are changing. We know that the dry periods are getting drier, the wet periods are getting wetter. And we need to figure out ways to transform our water systems, which tend to be centralized, fairly rigid, and somewhat static, into more decentralized, dynamic, flexible systems. And one way that we think we can do that is reintegrating more nature into those systems for a variety of reasons. Couple great examples of we've already talked about, treating our forested watersheds as the green infrastructure that they are, and actually restoring and maintaining the health of those forests, recognizing that it benefits our water system. Likewise, our seasonal floodplains, that where water overtops a weir flood space, not only for flood protection benefit and recharge, but also for environmental habitat. So nature-based solutions, the idea of reintegrating nature into our water systems is really powerful. And we want to identify ways to continue to amplify that. And so the governor's executive order was really trying to put a little bit more, elevate a little bit more the idea of investing in these multi-benefit nature-based solutions that you all are so familiar with. One of the targets that we've set is conserving 30% of our state by 2030. When we say conserve, we don't mean, fence off from people more land necessarily, but how do we improve environmental conservation on our working lands, on our farms, our ranches, our forests, and in our natural places? We think that actually more conservation, which can include, economically profitable working lands, will benefit the environment and ultimately our sustainability as an economy in California. Think about, your rice fields in the Sacramento Valley, world famous for its production of quality rice, but also this incomparable environmental habitat for migrating birds and shorebirds that's really replaced all the wetlands that we lost over time. To me, our advancing nature-based solutions, I think it dovetails really well with the vision that you guys are trying to drive in the Sacramento Valley. And I think over hopefully years and decades, we'll provide more resources and more policy tools to actually continue building out those nature-based solutions in your part of California.
And so I might just jump in with a few sort of more concrete ways that NCWA agencies can get involved in the implementation of the executive order. So there's the implementing mechanism is the California Biodiversity Collaborative. And that is bringing together state agencies, federal agencies, organizations, stakeholder organizations, and leaders like NCWA agencies, water agencies, to share information and build on best practices. And like Secretary Crowfoot said, you all have expertise that is critical to sort of understanding not only the needs, but also how to achieve them. So that network is getting off the ground now, and encourage folks to get involved. There's also going to be a report, Pathways to 3030, that is going to help set a baseline assessment so that we understand, what we're adding and how we're achieving that 30 by 30 goal. So that's another place where the expertise of your member agencies can be really helpful, and really encourage folks to take a look at the Resources Agency website, where there's a ton of information on all of this. And there will be lots of meetings in the near future to get that off the ground.
Kristen, thanks so much for reminding us of how folks can engage. And I might add that we'll be holding regional conversations. And so we'll likely be coming somewhere north of Sacramento into the Sacramento Valley to discuss sort of our efforts around conservation, nature-based solutions, and climate smart land strategy. So as Kristen said, excited for NCWA participation.
Yeah, that'd be great. We'd love to host you wherever you'd like to come. So thanks for that invitation. It's crazy, but this has been almost 40 minutes, so it's gone fast, and really appreciate both of your insights. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us, or other thoughts you'd have with our NCWA group in terms of things we ought to be doing in Sacramento Valley, or conversations we ought to be having?
Well, I would just say stay at it. I mean, frankly, Sacramento Valley is, to me, one of the more inspirational places in the state, where you're working across sectors: the ag sector, the environmental conservation sector, the water sector, the forest sector, to find workable solutions, both for communities and the environment and the economy. So I would say stay at it. Thad, you've been great about constructively pushing us to do more on this type of multi-benefit work, while us staying focused on the voluntary agreement. So I think we just need your ideas and continued collaboration. Really want to lift up much of what you do right now through NCWA and the Sacramento River Valley as a model for the rest of the state.
Yeah, I would echo that, and just also say, as I started out, we're facing really unprecedented challenges right now, and we are not going to solve them alone. The state can't do it alone, and really needs the engagement of everybody. It's an all hands on deck situation we're in. So really appreciate your continued involvement in the voluntary agreement space, and in helping with the 30 by 30 effort. And certainly my door is always open. I'm more accessible probably than Secretary Crowfoot, certainly more than Secretary Blumenfeld. So please feel free at any time to reach out.
So you just got to put your cell phone number right over there.
Exactly.
Yeah, I might add one more thing, which is bring us out to the field. I think a lot of us, especially, been trapped in our bedrooms with some school age kids learning within the house, or trapped in our offices. We're really excited to get back out when it's safe to do so. And I think it's so powerful to actually go out there and kick dirt and just to see things with you all. So I'm hoping that you engage state policymakers, from the agencies, from the legislature, get us out there and show us what's happening.
It's a great idea, Wade. It's really easy to socially distance up here, especially when you're outside. So it's a great way to do both. So really appreciate that insight. We definitely will do that. But Kristen, Wade, really appreciate your time spending with us. Again, it's been a real pleasure to talk with both of you and share your thoughts with our group as they listen to this when it's aired. And again, just thank you for coming and visiting up here, staying engaged with us. Again, we want to be partners with the state and with your agencies, and really appreciate you as people. I always say water is one of those, it's a relationship business. It's not one of those things where you can just do exchanges with, it's not a currency exchange or anything. It's really a relationship exchange. So really appreciate your personal interest and being willing to pick up the phone anytime to have these conversations. So again, appreciate you both for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right.